this is Paul Banis with GreatDad.com, and I am having a conversation today with Larry Lieberman, who is the CEO of Mouse.org. And Larry, please say hello, but also correct me about the mission of Mouse.org, which is it's a 501c3, so totally it's a nonprofit corporation, but there to inspire the use of technology by young people in a positive way. Am I summing it up correctly, or give me your
Yeah, no, it is a great summary. Listen, you are the great dad. I like to think of myself as a great dad. But we created Mouse.org 20 years ago as part of this national movement to use nonprofit organizations to supplement and drive innovation in learning. And that's where we find ourselves today in this vortex of the COVID-19 crisis, of really needing to provide some incredible innovation to keep our families learning, to keep our children being successful and having good outcomes, and frankly, supporting our teachers and the infrastructure of education.
And you have tools and support for educators, parents, and kids, or what services do you provide?
So Mouse.org is you'll find at Mouse.org, it's our website. As a mission, we support both students and the teachers that educate them. So we provide direct-to-student programs teaching STEM and computer science skills and some critical thinking and other STEM-related topics. In addition, we are one of the largest trainers in America of computer science teachers, helping them understand and embrace best practices in how to connect STEM curriculum with all students. And by all students, we mean, boys and girls, we mean white, Black, Latino. It's very important that all students embrace and have an opportunity to succeed in STEM related topics.
Yeah, and I saw that you have a series of grants or support programs for just to promote technology use to a diverse population.
Correct. I mean, the thrust of our activities are really towards Black and Brown students all over this country. Programs created by Mouse are now used at schools in 39 states across the country. We are based in New York City. This is the heart of where we operate and where our in-person activities are strongest. But really, the kind of work Mouse does is nationwide.
Okay, so that's a great segue into one of my first questions, especially during COVID time and the change of all of our vocabulary, everything around learning has just been completely upended. And we'd already talked about the technology divide between lower economic status groups as well as people of color, which I have to imagine has only been exacerbated given the resources, the number of the homes that have Wi-Fi, who have a computer, who have all the tools. What are you seeing in what you know about how that divide is evolving?
Yeah, I mean, I have to start by saying I'm an optimist by nature, and this crisis has had devastating effects on the entire nation, but especially on Black and Brown households, and the consequences have been dire. We were ahead of the curve, unfortunately, here in New York City. We had a really severe crisis this spring. I think now it's kind of fortunate that we've used that learning here in New York to help keep people safer. But what we've learned and what's been exposed is really sort of the superficial nature, perhaps, of what we even thought of as the digital divide. We thought the digital divide, or it was commonly accepted that the digital divide was really hardware driven and frankly Wi-Fi driven, that there were households without high-speed internet and there were households without ample devices for their children to fully learn on them. And in reality, that's just one layer of the digital divide. And we've been really fortunate in this crisis to be able to work with internet providers and hardware manufacturers to help put devices in the hands of students all over this country who previously did not have access. But what we've uncovered is that the devices are only as effective as the training that goes into the students and the teachers who are interacting with each other. And it's been critical through this period to really uptrain and upskill teachers who were perfectly qualified and super talented as being classroom educators to now all of a sudden have to move everything they do onto Zoom. It's a real shift. And there is a digital divide among educators in this country, just like there is among parents in this country, on getting the students prepared and interacting in these Zoom-like environments, because it's a different practice.
Yeah, I think a lot of teachers also, they were caught, like we all were, completely unaware of this type of situation. So they had those 2 or 3 months after schools closed, kids went home. The teachers were quickly trying to retool and give their lessons as they had planned them, now over Zoom. A lot of them didn't understand the technology. A lot of people, we all became Zoom experts overnight. Then they had the summer, and some of them did get up to speed. I know in my son's class, he's a junior. He thinks it's actually going very, very well. But then I have a cousin in Texas whose experience there has been completely divergent. And then I hear horrible stories about all the people being pulled in different directions, where they have to work, but they can't leave their kids behind. What do? They have to quit their job, or they're really thrown into difficult situations. And I don't know, how this all plays out, and whether it gets better before we solve this thing. Do you have any kind of feeling for how standardized teaching can become in a short amount of time?
Yeah, and listen, there's a lot to unpack in what you said, right? Because there's this fundamental shift right now of what we've accepted for generations is conventional schooling, right? So, and frankly, with that goes the shift in what was conventional parenting, right? At most, a parent's deepest engagement on a day-to-day, morning by morning basis was getting their kid to the bus stop or getting them to school, right? And frankly, the parental role changed, so that now the parent's involved throughout the day, and it's really put everything up in the air. I mean, I think the key, as we look at things at mouse.org, is as we prepare teachers to be strong remote learning instructors and strong blended learning instructors, I think what people also aren't taking into account is the moving nature of all that, right? And as consumers, we're accustomed, if we use a mobile app on our phone, for example, we're accustomed that there's an update, right? The little red light goes off, whatever your platform is, and you update whatever your favorite app is. And we say, gee, that's moved, or that's different, okay? The remote learning platforms that Google has and others have, like Google Classroom is one, for example, but these remote learning platforms that teachers all over the country are using are now accelerating their development because the demand is so great. So even teachers who sat down over the summer and took the initiative to learn and get more deeply involved into these online tools now are faced using something that's being updated every week or two, and buttons are moving and features are changing, and now I can do this, and what does that do, and why can't I hear my students? And it's complicated, and parents feel the same way, frankly, because they're on the receiving end of that, and they're seeing it as well.
Yeah, and that gets to an issue, I think, with technology that I'm really interested in your point of view on, is when things are moving like that, there are a lot of people who are there are even exceptions among kids, but the younger you are, the more you realize, oh, that button moved from the right to left. They've added this new feature. You're able to grok that and integrate it really quickly. I'm really interested in whether you've seen whether online learning works better for some kids versus others. I mean, I've heard sometimes that extroverts are having a real problem with online learning because it doesn't give them the outlet for as much expression as they're used to. So they're feeling very, very dissatisfied with the social experience. And then other people have said that introverts are doing very well because they like the amount of time that they're working alone, and they're not distracted by all that stuff. So and also, are there subjects that you found that work better online than others, and that might give us some insights?
Sure. What we're finding is a lot of anecdotal evidence right
Yes.
now, and the jury's still out, and the data is still being collected. Really, one of the ways educators are describing it is there's a new level to the playing field. We're not leveling the playing field. We're not sure what's happening exactly, but there definitely is a new level, and students who were more actively engaged in an interactive discussion setting are finding it, uh, periodically we do get reports of them finding it more challenging to have to be a passive learner. And yes, we are hearing stories of passive learners being more engaged. I think what really is getting the most attention right now are how many students really are getting services or typically got services in schools that were health and wellness related that aren't getting those services right now, and how is, the distance in those services affecting their ability to learn.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely been complicated, there's no doubt about it. And the burden, unfortunately, at the moment is falling on teachers and parents.
Yeah, I think I think that's really important that we all are aware that it is a really much of a moving situation. And if I mean, you're very close to it, and if you have not yet seen data about it, it means that we're still in a period of transition and not knowing. It'll be interesting to see how we do for a situation that may go on for another year. So talking more about STEM, since that that's really been in vogue for, like, I don't know, but it's been about 10 years. We had talked a little bit before we started about the difference between boys and girls and the push for STEM to all kinds of people, even if they're not necessarily STEM oriented, because we realize as a society, as an economy, STEM is really a gateway to the future. There's going to be more jobs. There's not a world that we can exist in that doesn't involve a lot more science and technology and math. Yet not everybody is as interested in it or as turned on by it. So let's first of all talk about maybe the more controversial subject between boys and girls. You have a boy and a girl. I have a boy and a girl, and in our family, we've definitely noticed, even though my wife and I we really loved math. We saw the poetry in math. It was something that was just very intellectually stimulating to us when we were in school, even though we didn't go on to become math professors. Our daughter, she did well in math, but she never saw that same type. She never got that same type of spark. Now, it's not to say that my son has either. He likes math, but he does appreciate it at a different level than she does. So not to get into too much, I guess my personal philosophy is everybody should do what they can do, and there should not be any kind of barriers to girls ever doing math. And in fact, I'd say I pushed my daughter more into math than I did my son. But the fact that she didn't want to get into it didn't mean that I wanted to do it more. But how do you see that in what Mouse.org's role is
Sure.
in the differences between boys and girls for STEM?
Yeah. It's interesting. The data is pretty overwhelming in this case, and Mouse has always followed this, which is students are most successful pursuing things that they can see themselves being successful at, right? And it sort of sounds intuitive, but the biggest obstacles to a student seeing themselves being successful at something is actually seeing someone who looks like them and acts like them and comes from their community successful in that role. And that barrier exists not just for girls who may not be seeing themselves when they're looking at CEOs on television, or may not be seeing people that look like them when they're looking at engineers or scientists in a YouTube video or in television or in movies. It also relates certainly directly to students of color who are not seeing executives and engineers and developers as prevalently as they are seeing white men in those roles. So one of the things that Mouse takes so seriously is the mentoring situation, where we engage students with successful engineers and STEM leaders who come from comparable communities, because girls have to see women in those roles. Black students need to see great, successful, extraordinary Black engineers. Our head of programs reminds me all the time, and we use it as an example. The inventor of GPS was a Black woman.
But you don't hear
Right?
about that. Yeah.
It's right, and not every successful technologist looks like Mark Zuckerberg or Steve Jobs.
Right.
And the role of organizations like Mouse includes exposing students of color to great, successful STEM leaders of color.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big deal.
Yeah,
because that's got a lot to do with it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I guess the corollary to that was, what do you do with kids who are not interested in STEM? They're just not drawn to STEM.
Sure.
Because I think appreciation for STEM is really important as well, even if you're not going to be, an engineer.
Right. From my parenting perspective, more than my professional perspective, what I say is to always encourage students and children to pursue what is of interest to them, and then sync the STEM to that activity. Right. I think my favorite sort of anecdote to that is my son wrote his college application. When it came college application time, I told my son he could write about anything he wanted as long as it was important to him. And he literally wrote his college application about Nickelodeon cartoons. Okay. Which is not, I suppose, a parent's first dream. But he loved Nickelodeon cartoons, and he was knowledgeable about them, and most importantly, could write passionately about it. And lo and behold, he is a college graduate.
That's all it took, was Nickelodeon cartoons.
No, but I mean, it's part of what we have to remember. Teachers are so good at this. When you're trying to teach something to a young person and it's not their natural affinity, you have to weave it into their own priorities to make it relevant to them. And maybe the real messaging for parents is, don't despair. Right? All those hours you're screaming at your child to turn off the PlayStation or whatever the device is and go read a book or something. There are ways to incorporate the things that our children love into what's important for them to learn, so they can broaden their blinders and see the world, whether it be through literature or any other adventure.
Yeah, well, certainly everybody is very worried about the amount of time kids spend playing games and doing other things after they've spent time online. And have you seen anything in that area where whether there are new challenges, or how you actually keep kids thinking about different activities after they've spent 7 or 8 hours on a screen? I mean, in just completely involved in technology, and then we'd love them to do something else on a screen, or something else involved with the sciences, which may seem like a continuation of school.
Right.
But maybe that goes to your point about trying to find the things that turn them on, that aren't necessarily STEM related, but are about a dog or about some other thing in the natural world that is about understanding the natural world.
Sure. I mean, boundaries are always going to be critical. Right. And one of the things, and this does apply to both Mouse and my personal style, is that we want to try and keep our students, especially now in remote learning, on a more conventional schedule. It's all too easy for young people to slip into a nocturnal schedule that makes it difficult for them to really lean into their daytime remote learning. And that's probably the biggest thing we try and encourage parents to keep their students on a more conventional schedule, so that they're not on Twitch or we're on their Xbox all through the night.
Well, that's a very big piece of advice, I think, because the schools have done a fairly good job, I think, of trying to replicate that school day. I mean, my son starts at 8 and he's in class till 3:30 or 4. There's very little time for breaks in there. I mean, he gets 20 minutes, whatever it was that he used to get for lunch, and he just has to run down to the kitchen and grab a sandwich, and he's back up. I've never seen him with the door closed so much, but maybe that is less a serendipitous thing or part of the way it works, and it is really a decision by the schools to keep that routine in place because it is so valuable for them.
Yeah, the routine is pretty critical.
Right.
Structure is good. Young people thrive with structure.
Yeah. I've always said that. That's very good. Well, Larry, it's been a really pleasure talking to you. Is there anything else about mouse.org that people should know about, either ways to support you or the kind of resources you have for parents?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we try and help parents with during this remote and blended learning kind of time we have is to encourage parents to engage their kids in projects that can occupy the student for an hour, for 2 hours, for 2 days, for 3 days, depending on what the student's interest or attention span is. So among the things we've done is created projects.mouse.org, which is really an online resource for STEM-related projects that might appeal to a young person at times when they're sort of bored or distracted, because the activities, help them design their own video games or design song segments or animation segments, helps them do the things they might want to do, but in a project-based environment. So there's a beginning, a middle, and end. They can feel successful and they can do this work independently. And that seems to be so important for parents right now.
Yeah, I know you also promote code.org as a resource.
Sure, we do a lot of work with code.org. They're a great organization, and their curriculum is really strong and makes teachers very, very strong computer science teachers.
Great. All right. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you and taking the time to tell us about your point of view on this strange world we're living in and how it's evolving. Larry Lieberman, CEO of Mouse.org. This is Paul Banis at GreatDad.com. We'll see you next time. Bye.